the suitcase handle dug into my palm as I stood frozen at the doorway. My mother's eyes burned with a coldness I hadn't seen before. "Benna, you need to leave. Your sister needs this space more than you," she said, her voice sharp, final. Kemi, my older sister, leaned back on the couch with a faint smirk, as if she'd won a battle I didn't even know I was fighting. My heart pounded as I stepped outside, feeling the door slam behind me. What none of them knew was that the moment I left, their perfect little plan would unravel, and panic would set in faster than they ever imagined. Benna held her small bag tightly as she stepped out of the family house, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. Her mother's words still rang in her ears, sharp, final, and heavy. "You need to leave. Your sister needs this space more than you." It felt like the ground beneath her had given way, like everything she had ever known as home was now slipping out of reach. She glanced back one last time, hoping to see even a flicker of regret in her mother's eyes, but there was nothing, only coldness. The neighbors stood by their gates, whispering as they watched her drag her bag down the dusty road. Some shook their heads in pity, others whispered about how unfair it was. But no one stepped forward. To them, this was just another family drama, not their fight. Every step Benna took felt heavier than the last, like the weight of betrayal was pressing down on her shoulders. Inside the house, laughter floated out through the open windows. Kemi was already celebrating her victory, lounging on the couch like a queen who had finally secured her throne. She smiled sweetly at their mother, who busied herself with cooking, pretending not to hear the faint sound of the door closing behind the daughter she had just cast out. To them, it was as if Benna had never existed. Benna paused at the corner of the street and turned back. The house she had called home all her life now looked strange, distant, almost foreign. It hurt more than she expected. She thought of the nights she had stayed up studying under that roof, the mornings she had swept the compound, the quiet moments when she had prayed for her mother to one day see her the same way she saw Kemi. But now the truth was plain. She was never meant to be the chosen one. As the evening sun dipped low, painting the sky with orange and red, Benna wiped her tears quickly. She didn't want the neighbors to see her weakness. Deep inside, pain mixed with a spark of something else, a quiet vow. They thought they had won by pushing her out, but she knew one thing for certain. This was not the end of her story. This was only the beginning. And though she had nothing but her small bag and her wounded heart, she walked forward, refusing to look back again. As Benna walked further away from the house, memories began to flood her mind like a river she could not stop. She remembered being a little girl, sitting quietly in the corner while her mother handed Kemi a shiny new doll. Kemi squealed with joy, hugging it tight, while Benna sat with her old, broken toy that had already lost one arm. When she asked if she too could get a new one, her mother simply smiled and said, "You are strong, Benna. You don't need much. Let Kemi enjoy." At that moment, even as a child, she learned that her desires would always come second. The scenes replayed one after another. On birthdays, Kemi's cake was tall and decorated with candles, while Benna's was always small, plain, sometimes just a piece of bread with butter. At school, whenever fees were tight, her mother would rush to pay Kemi's first, leaving Benna to sit in class embarrassed when her name was called for unpaid dues. She could still hear the whispers of her classmates and the sting of humiliation. And yet, every time her mother would tell her, "You're my strong one. You can endure." Even in little things, the difference showed. If there was new clothing to be bought, Kemi received the bright, colorful dresses, while Benna was handed the faded hand-me-downs. When visitors came, their mother proudly displayed Kemi, showing off her achievements, her hair, her clothes, while Benna was told to help in the kitchen or serve drinks. The praise always flowed one way, and so did the attention. What hurt the most was not the lack of gifts or money. It was the feeling that her worth was invisible. She worked hard, tried to please, but no matter what she did, Kemi remained the shining star in their mother's eyes. When Kemi failed at something, excuses were made, comfort was given, and blame was shifted. But if Benna made even the smallest mistake, she was scolded and reminded to learn to be better. As she dragged her bag that evening, these memories pressed on her heart like stones. She realized this moment, being thrown out, was not sudden. It was simply the final page of a book that had been written long ago. From the very beginning, her place in that house had been temporary, conditional. Kemi was always the one to be loved, to be protected, to be celebrated. Benna was always the one told to survive. She stopped for a moment, breathing deeply, and whispered to herself, "They always told me to be strong. Maybe they were right. Maybe strength is the only gift they ever gave me." And with that, she wiped her tears, carrying both the pain of her past and the fire to prove she was worth far more than they ever believed. Benna wandered through the streets that evening with her bag dragging behind her, not sure where to go. The night air was cold, and each step made her feel smaller, more abandoned. For a moment, she thought of sleeping outside on a bench, but the thought of being completely alone in the dark scared her. She scrolled through her phone and hesitated before calling an old friend, Amadi, who lived on the other side of town. His voice was warm when he answered, and without asking too many questions, he told her to come. When she finally reached his place, it was nothing like home. The apartment was small, one mattress on the floor, a single chair, and barely enough space to stretch her legs. Amadi gave her half of the mattress and smiled as if sharing it was the easiest thing to do. She thanked him quietly, her voice almost breaking. That night, lying on the thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, Benna felt the weight of everything sink in. The house she grew up in, the mother who raised her, had chosen someone else over her. She pulled the small blanket closer and tried to fight the tears, but they came anyway. As the days passed, she realized how hard life outside her mother's house really was. She helped Amadi wash dishes, sweep the room, and sometimes skipped meals so she wouldn't be a burden. But in the silence of the nights, when Amadi was asleep, she would sit by the tiny window, hugging her knees, and whisper to herself, "If they think I am disposable, I will rise so high they'll choke on their regret." It was not just a promise, it became her survival. Benna started walking the streets during the day, searching for anything she could do to earn money. Sometimes she helped at a small bakery, sweeping and cleaning in exchange for leftover bread. Other times, she picked up cheap materials from the market and tried to stitch together simple crafts she could sell. The coins she earned were barely enough, but each little success gave her strength. People around the neighborhood noticed her. Some pitied her, others whispered, but Benna refused to let shame hold her down. Every time she remembered her mother's voice telling her to leave, she felt a fire burning inside. The pain did not break her, it began to shape her. At night, when she lay back down on the thin mattress, Benna no longer cried the way she did that first night. Instead, she wrote her ideas on small scraps of paper, plans she believed would one day change her life. She was determined to turn her heartbreak into something greater. They had cast her out like she was nothing, but deep inside, she knew her story was only beginning. Benna woke up each morning before the sun rose, tying her scarf tightly as she hurried to the bakery. The owner, Madame Leo, was kind but strict. The work was hard, mixing flour, carrying trays, cleaning floors, but Benna never complained. She worked long hours, her hands covered in flour and her back aching. Yet she pushed through because she knew she had no other choice. At the end of each day, she collected her small pay and carefully saved it, resisting the urge to spend even a coin on herself. But the bakery alone was not enough. After work, she would stop by the market, picking up cheap fabric, beads and thread. In the tiny space she shared with Amadi, she sat cross-legged on the floor, crafting bracelets, hairbands and small purses. Her fingers moved quickly, turning scraps into something beautiful. She took pictures of them with her old phone and posted them online, not knowing if anyone would buy. To her surprise, a few orders trickled in. Each sale, no matter how small, felt like a victory. Instead of lying awake at night crying, Benna began to fill notebooks with her thoughts. She wrote down everything: how to improve her designs, how to save money, how to one day open her own shop. The same tears that once came from pain now came from determination. She would look at her rough sketches and whisper to herself, "One day, people will know my name." Her routine became a rhythm. Bakery in the morning, crafts in the evening, planning at night. While others her age were out enjoying life, Benna sacrificed her comfort for her future. Some nights, exhaustion made her hands shake, but she pushed herself to finish just one more bracelet, one more note in her book. She knew that every small step mattered. Word of her crafts began to spread. A customer who bought one bracelet told a friend, and soon more orders came. Her phone buzzed more often now, and each notification made her smile. It was not yet enough to change her life, but it gave her hope that she was building something real. Even when doubts tried to creep in, when she remembered her mother's rejection or Kemi's smirk, Benna reminded herself that her worth no longer depended on them. She was creating her own path, slowly but surely. With every long shift at the bakery and every late-night sketch, she was planting seeds for a future only she could imagine. And though she was still in that cramped little apartment, Benna no longer felt like the discarded girl who walked away with a heavy bag. She felt like a woman preparing to bloom, one step closer to proving that her pain had a purpose. Back at the family house, life was not as peaceful as their mother had imagined. At first, she thought pushing Benna away would bring balance, but it quickly became clear that Kemi was not the kind of daughter who made life easier. With Benna gone, all of Kemi's demands grew louder. She wanted special meals every day, rice with meat, rich stews, soft bread in the mornings. If the food was not perfect, she would throw a tantrum, leaving her mother frustrated and exhausted. Kemi also craved constant attention. She would sit in the living room, scrolling through her phone, while expecting their mother to run around the house for her. If visitors came, Kemi wanted her mother to speak proudly of her, to treat her like the center of the world. She basked in the spotlight, but the shine quickly turned into a shadow when responsibility came. Unlike Benna, who quietly worked and contributed, Kemi drained everything without giving back. Finances became another heavy burden. Kemi's tastes were expensive. She wanted new clothes, shoes, and the latest phone, even when there was barely enough money to cover the electricity bill. Each time her mother tried to explain that things were tight, Kemi would sulk, guilt-tripping her into finding the money somehow. The household that once survived, with balance, now felt suffocated by her endless wants. The absence of Benna was deeply felt in ways her mother did not expect. Chores that Benna once handled piled up. The compound grew untidy, clothes remained unwashed, and the little order that Benna quietly maintained disappeared. Their mother often found herself too tired to keep up, wishing silently that she still had Benna's steady hands to help. But pride kept her from admitting it out loud. Neighbors noticed the change too. Where they once saw Benna sweeping the yard and greeting them politely, now they saw Kemi lounging on the veranda, demanding things from her mother. Whispers started spreading. "That girl does nothing but spend," they said. The same neighbors who had pitted Benna now pitted the mother, who thought she made the right choice. Day by day, stress weighed heavily on her. She remembered how Benna never asked for much, how she managed to survive on so little. She remembered the quiet strength in her second daughter, a strength she had mistaken for weakness. Now she saw clearly that the daughter she sent away had been the one holding the home together all along. As Kemi's demands grew louder, her mother's regret grew deeper. Peace was gone, replaced with endless tension. What she thought was a victory, choosing Kemi over Benna, was slowly becoming her greatest mistake, though she had not yet spoken the words aloud. Deep inside, she began to realize that losing Benna was costing her far more than she had ever imagined. One evening, after another long day at the bakery, Benna sat on the floor of Amadi's tiny apartment, finishing a new bag she had sewn from leftover fabric. It was different from her other designs, colorful, bold, and stitched with a unique pattern she had sketched late one night. When she posted a picture of it online, she didn't think much of it. She had done this many times before, and usually only a few people noticed. But this time was different. Within hours, her phone buzzed more than ever. Strangers began liking, sharing, and commenting. They loved the design. Some even asked if they could buy it immediately. By the next morning, the post had spread beyond her small circle. Fashion bloggers reposted it, influencers talked about it, and people started tagging their friends, saying they wanted one too. Benna could hardly believe her eyes. Her inbox was overflowing with messages from people ready to pay. Orders poured in so quickly that she lost count. The girl who once struggled to sell a single bracelet was now facing a demand she could barely keep up with. At first, Benna panicked. She only had 2 hands, a few scraps of fabric, and very little money to buy more. But instead of letting fear stop her, she worked harder than ever. She went to the market with her small savings, buying every material she could afford. She stayed up late, stitching and packing, while Amadi helped her answer messages and deliver packages. Sleep became rare, but excitement fueled her more than rest ever could. Soon, her story began catching attention outside social media. A local newspaper wrote about the young girl turning scraps into gold. Not long after, A popular fashion page featured her designs, calling her the rising star of handmade crafts. Then came the biggest surprise, an email from an investor who wanted to meet her. He offered to support her with money and resources if she could expand her work. For the first time in her life, someone believed in her not because of family ties, but because of her own talent. The side hustle she had started to survive was suddenly becoming something much bigger than she ever dreamed. She went from making a few items at night to planning collections, hiring helpers, and mapping out a real business. Every day felt unreal, but she never forgot the nights when she had whispered to herself in the dark, promising she would rise above her pain. What had begun as a way to keep herself busy and strong had now transformed into her turning point. The world was watching, cheering her on, and giving her the chance her own family never gave her. Benna realized that the rejection that once broke her had now pushed her into the very place she was meant to be. This was no longer survival. This was the start of her success. Months passed, and the community that once whispered about Benna being thrown out now whispered something entirely different. At the market, women gathering to buy food would lean closer and say, "Did you hear about Benna? That girl is the owner of that fast-growing brand online." Others nodded, amazed at how quickly her name was rising. People who once pitied her now spoke her name with respect. They saw her designs everywhere, on young girls walking to school, on women heading to work, even featured on local TV shows. The girl who had left her mother's house with only a bag was now becoming a symbol of strength and success. Back at the family home, Kemi and her mother heard the whispers too. At first, they tried to brush it off, claiming Benna was probably exaggerating or lying. But soon the evidence became too loud to ignore. Neighbors showed off the items they had bought from Benna's brand, proudly saying, "This is from her collection." Even relatives who had once stayed silent during Benna's humiliation were now praising her achievements. The shock in the household was undeniable. Kemi, however, had not changed her ways. She continued to drain every resource in the house. She demanded expensive clothes, trips to salons, and money to maintain her flashy lifestyle. She had no job, no income, and no intention of making one. Whenever her mother tried to caution her, she snapped back, saying she deserved to be cared for. Without Benna around to balance things, the weight of Kemi's habits grew heavier by the day. Bills piled up quickly. The electricity was often cut off, the food in the house reduced, and debts began knocking at the door. Their mother, once convinced that keeping Kemi close was the better choice, started to feel the sharp sting of regret. Every trip to the market was filled with embarrassment, as women whispered not only about Benna's success, but also about Kemi's wasteful lifestyle. The contrast could not have been clearer. On one side, Benna's name was rising like the sun, bringing pride to everyone who spoke it. On the other side, Kemi's presence in the home was like a storm, leaving nothing but demands, debts, and tension. Their mother often sat in silence, staring at the walls, remembering how she had chosen Kemi over Benna. What once felt like the right decision now seemed like the start of her downfall. The house itself felt heavier. What was once filled with Benna's quiet work and small contributions was now empty of peace. Every day, the walls seemed to echo regret. Their mother could no longer ignore the truth. The daughter she had discarded was now thriving, while the one she had chosen was pulling her deeper into ruin. It was a bitter shock, one that made her wonder if she had already lost the chance to make things right. It started with a knock on the door one hot afternoon. Their mother opened it to find two angry men standing outside, holding papers in their hands. They asked for Kemi by name, their voices sharp, their expressions stern. When Kemi appeared, dressed in a new outfit she had bought just days before, the men wasted no time. They told her she owed money, serious money, that she had borrowed months ago to keep up her lifestyle. Jewelry, makeup, clothes, outings with friends, all of it had been bought on credit. Now the collectors were here, demanding payment. Kemi's face went pale as she stammered, trying to explain. She turned quickly to her mother, expecting her to cover for her as always. But her mother's hands trembled. She barely had enough to feed them, let alone pay off debts that stretched into hundreds of thousands. The men gave a warning. They would be back soon, and if the money was not ready, there would be consequences. When they left, the silence in the house was heavy, broken only by Kemi's angry voice. Instead of admitting fault, Kemi lashed out at her mother. She accused her of not protecting her, of failing to provide enough, of letting things get this bad. Her mother, tired and defeated, could only sit in her chair with tears in her eyes. For years she had sacrificed everything for Kemi, chosen her over Benna, and now she was being blamed for the disaster she never created. As the days went by, the situation worsened. More knocks came. Letters of warning arrived. The collectors spread the story around town, and soon everyone knew that Kemi was drowning in debt. Neighbors who once admired the family now whispered about their shame. The proud image that Kemi tried so hard to maintain crumbled before her eyes. It was then, in her desperation, that the thought of Benna came creeping back into their minds. Benna, the daughter they had pushed aside, the one they believed was disposable. She was no longer the weak girl with a bag walking down the street. She was the one the whole community was now talking about, the one whose business was growing stronger every day. If anyone could help them now, it was her. Kemi, however, refused to lower her pride at first. She shouted that Benna would never help, that she was too bitter to forgive. But as the collectors grew more threatening, even she began to panic. Their mother, holding her head in her hands, whispered again and again, "If only Benna were here. If only I hadn't sent her away." The house was no longer filled with Kemi's laughter or her careless demands. Instead, it shook with fear and desperation. The very daughter they had thrown away had now become the one lifeline they desperately needed. The panic settled deep into their bones, and for the first time, they realized the cost of their choices might destroy them completely. The first message came from a distant cousin. Then another came from an aunt who had stayed silent when Benna was thrown out. Finally, her mother herself sent a short message that simply said, "Please come home." At first, Benna read them with disbelief. These were the same people who had shut the door in her face, the same family that had chosen Kemi over her without a second thought. For a moment, she wanted to ignore them, to let them taste the full weight of their regret. But something inside her told her that this was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment she would return, not as the broken girl they abandoned, but as the woman she had become. When Benna finally agreed to visit, the entire community seemed to notice. Whispers spread quickly. "She's coming back. The successful one is returning to the same house she was chased from." Neighbors waited, curious to see how the story would unfold. On the day she arrived, the difference in her was undeniable. She stepped out of the car with calm grace, dressed simply but elegantly, carrying herself with a quiet confidence that needed no explanation. Her hair was neatly styled, her clothes spoke of success, and the way she moved made it clear. This was no longer the Benna who dragged her bag away in tears. This was a woman who had built herself from nothing, and it showed in every step. Inside the house, her mother's hands shook as she opened the door. Kemi stood behind her, fidgeting, unable to meet Benna's eyes. The same living room where Benna had once been told to leave now felt small and tense, filled with shame instead of power. The air was heavy with regret. Her mother began to speak, words stumbling out, apologies mixed with excuses. She said she had not known things would turn out this way, that she only wanted to support Kemi, that she had made mistakes. Kemi tried to speak too, but her voice cracked under the weight of embarrassment. For once, she had nothing to boast about. Benna listened silently, her expression calm. She did not shout, she did not cry, she did not need to. Her presence alone said more than words could. Every detail of her appearance, every confident breath, showed them how far she had risen without their help. She had walked out with nothing, and now she had returned with everything they once denied her: dignity, success, and independence. Neighbors peeked through windows, watching closely. They could see the shift in power, the reversal of roles. The girl once treated as disposable now stood as the strongest in the room. The family had begged her back, but she was no longer desperate for their approval. She stood there, tall and unshaken, proof that sometimes the ones you throw away return brighter than anyone ever expected. Benna's eyes moved slowly from her mother to her sister, the very two people who had once stood tall in this same house and told her she was not needed. Now their shoulders were slumped, their faces pale, and their eyes heavy with shame. She took a deep breath, her voice calm and steady, not loud, not angry, but filled with the kind of strength that silence brings after years of pain. "You kicked me out to make space for Kemi," she began, her words slicing through the thick air. Her mother's lips trembled, and Kemi shifted uncomfortably, staring at the floor. But when I left, I found space to build myself. She paused, letting the words sink deep, letting them remember the night she had walked away with nothing but tears and a small bag. Now she stood before them, polished and unshaken, proof of everything they thought she could never be. You needed me all along, Benna continued, her eyes fixed on her mother. Yet I needed none of this. Not your pity. Not your approval. Not even this house. She let her hand glide across the furniture, as if it were nothing more than dust to her now. I built my own family, my own worth, and my own place. Her mother's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. Kemi opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. The house that once echoed with pride for one daughter and rejection for the other now sat in heavy silence, the weight of regret pressing down on every wall. Benna's voice softened, but it carried more power than ever. I came back not because I needed you, but so you could see with your own eyes what you threw away. She turned toward the door, her heels clicking against the floor, each step a reminder that she no longer belonged to the shadows of this home. The silence behind her was louder than any words they could have spoken. For the first time, her mother and sister understood the depth of their mistake, not in angry shouts, not in revenge, but in the calm truth of Benna's final word. The panic that had once consumed them melted into something far heavier, regret. And as Benna stepped outside into the world she had built for herself, the house remained quiet, a shell of broken pride and missed chances.